the other banjo players, but there are some other names that you have mentioned over the years as far as excuse me, banjo playing goes, and like Alan Shelton is one that always comes to mind.
Yeah.
How did you find out about Alan?
Okay. Well, let me preface that by saying I first heard Lester and Earl on the radio when I was home when I was about 14 and got blown away by the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And was listening to a lot of Hank Williams, but that instrument, I mean, just, it was so great. It was like beyond anything I could almost conceive of trying to play.
Yeah.
But when I heard they had a kind of a hit, there was this radio station that was coast to coast powerful, WCKY, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yep.
And the DJ was Lee Sutton. And later on, Lee Moore came on to take the latest part of it. And he played, back then, of course, country music was really country music. And bluegrass was just part of that scene. It was just part of what you heard on country. It was country music too, you know, just Monroe's own individualistic form of it. So, but I heard a little Monroe, but I didn't hear the banjo much on it. I think when I first heard him, it was probably when he was using a lot of double fiddles. Yeah. Probably Kenny Baker and Bobby Hicks.
Right.
And so then for a year or two, I wasn't listening to it much because my female cousin, who was a wonderful person, convinced me I should be listening to pop music. And for a year or two, I listened less. Then I got back to it and stayed with it ever since.
Yeah.
And I heard Lester Earl's recording of Dim Lights, Thick Smoke and Foggy Mountain Chimes. And Foggy Mountain Chimes remains my favorite banjo instrumental today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So absolutely clear and polished with that beautiful Benny Martin stuff on it.
Yeah, and that's incredible. It's incredible.
And I think I had the 78 originally, which eventually got broken, that had I'll Go Steppin' 2 on the other side of the record.
Man.
Of 78 RPM.
You know, I'll Go Steppin' 2, that entire era of Flat and Scruggs, that year, like 53.
Yep.
That's never been beaten, and it doesn't get any better, you know. I'm not saying that people are more technically advanced, but that's not really my point. So why am I bringing it up? I don't know, but it's still. I mean, there's a tone, a sound, or a tonality to the recording room, their studio itself. I mean, if you listen to the one with like Randall Lynn Ragg and the LP from '56, they did. That had, as far as Flat and Scruggs goes, that had a really distinctly different sound to it.
Yep.
Do you know? I don't know if it was some echo chamber or something. There would have been a part around the same time Monroe used the echo chamber in the Cheyenne.
Yeah, which was one of the greatest ever too.
Yeah.
That and Scotland.
Yeah.
But didn't have the banjo, of course. But I wouldn't say it was the equal of Flat and Scruggs in the same era. Well, but it was the closest thing to it.
Yeah.
And very close. But
yeah.
That was to me, that era of Flat and Scruggs set the standard for bluegrass.
Yeah.
And it always will.
And you know, coincidentally, that's when they were playing for WPTF here in Raleigh, and they lived here for most of a year, I guess. Benny Martin's daughter was born at the old Rex Hospital in Raleigh, and there is a house off Powell Drive in Raleigh where Flat and Scruggs and other artists that were under contract with the WPTF, they would stay there while they were in town. So my friend Barney Rogers has an old neighbor who remember as a kid seeing Lester and Earl just around the house, as neighbors, not.
Oh my gosh.
And that's where I took Ronnie Smith and Seth over there. You can imagine, the few people who really would care if for anything like that esoteric. But we went there and with Barney and had our pictures taken outside the.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And it's right behind a sort of a well-known Raleigh landmark at a party beverage store on Weston Boulevard.
And that Sandy Mountain show you helped me get onto that on Facebook, where they did the show up in a little bit north of that, North Carolina.
Yeah.
I was part of that time too, probably.
Yeah.
That one of the things I would most like to experience, that I most miss in my life, well, 2 or 3 things. One of them was seeing Flat and Scruggs live with Benny Martin in that era, when the majority of the public, well, that was their mainstream music, and how they responded.
Yeah.
That would be one of the big misses. I would also love to have seen a live show of Hank Williams, even though it's not bluegrass.
Right.
It's got the same feeling in it.
That's one thing. All good music has one thing in common, and whatever it is, soul or something that really touches you. The stylistic label is really not that important. To me, it's like, I know it's kind of a cliche to say, like, I like good music, but it's kind of it's a cliche for a reason.
Yeah, most cliches have a firm foundation.
Oh, absolutely.
But they just get thinned out too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And the other thing has nothing to do with music, but I would love to have been able to see the great Eastern forests before they were cut, before the white man took them down. I would love to have seen them, and even gotten to meet some of the Native Americans. They had really a very high culture then, even though it wasn't very technical.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Many other things, but I think of those first. But there is a place in Hot Springs, North Carolina, kind of a way out in the country.
I know exactly where it's at.
Okay. They have a theater there where it used to be the location of the Carolina Jubilee or Jamboree, and I think every Friday night or Saturday, one or the other, somebody would show up from the phone company and run a telephone line out to the pole outside, and you would go coast to coast national, like the Grand Ole Opry or Wheeling.
Yeah.
And you had Flat and Scruggs had played there, and Bill Monroe,
Yeah.
and Hank, and many of the others. I went in to see the building. It's still there. About 5 years ago, they were trying to revitalize something.
Yeah.
But I don't think it'll be like it used to. I mean, you won't ever see, probably, at least not in our lifetime, or the lifetime of the present generation, the bluegrass being a mainstream form, and it doesn't need to be, really.
No, I mean, what happens with any kind of mainstream music, it's gonna lose its stylistic properties. It just gets watered down to just the smallest common denominator. It just dumbifies the music. So, I lost you there.
Something in the air tonight.
Yeah.
Got that in one of my songs. Anyway, we'll go on. At any rate, I would love to have seen that. But heck, we have the advantage of most people that are into bluegrass understanding it more, not completely, but more than most people do that just come off the street than turn on the radio, you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
At any rate, I'm getting back to, so I heard Lester and Earl, and then
What year did you see Lester and Earl?
I didn't see them till, let's see, I don't remember if it was on the Opry or at Footguard Hall in Hartford. That's when I actually recorded them. And it flattened, just blown away. I was, by that time, already picking up the TV shows. And it was a big thing for me to see the difference between Lester and Earl on Another Night as opposed to the recording. Because I was used to listening to the recordings, which were great, obviously. But what I didn't have a complete understanding of was that was just the improvisation that happened that particular night. And on the TV, they did the same song differently.
Yeah.
Every week. But at any rate, I saw them at Footguard Hall in Hartford live, and I saw them on the Opry once very briefly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which happened first.
And
but would you believe if they were within 100 miles of where I was staying at the time, and it wasn't 3 feet of snow on the road, I'd get there to see them.
Oh, yeah.
And try to record them if I could.
Knowing you and your passion, I can very well see you get stuck in the snowstorm to get to Flat Scruggs.
I tried once, I gave it a try. At any rate, so I knew from the beginning, I started buying Bluegrass records where I could buy them when I went down to William and Mary for a year. I then dropped out and went back to Tuskegee College several years later.
Yeah.
But I heard, well, the story there, I may have told you this, I really wanted to see this music live, and I decided, well, when I went to William and Mary, I was part of a church organization having to do with the Methodist Church. I think it was called the Wesley Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's what it is. Yeah.
Yep. And there were a bunch of guys and girls, maybe 4 others, in on it too. And they had a kind of a festival or a gathering, a big gathering in Richmond. And I'd come through Richmond.
What year is this again?
What's that now?
What year is this again?
This would have been fall of 56.
Okay.
Just come down. I'd only been in William and Mary I'd only opened for about a month. probably November of 56. And the bunch of us went down to this convention in Richmond, but my dad and family, we'd driven through Richmond, getting to Williamsburg, where William and Mary is, and I was going past the location of the Old Dominion Barn Dance. And it had a picture of Reno and Smiley there. I said, holy smokes, you can see people actually play this stuff. And so I knew that, and I talked to all the guys and girls into sneaking out of the convention and going off to see Reno and Smiley. We got in trouble for it, but what the hell, And I got to see Reno and Smiley.
You got in trouble for seeing Reno and Smiley.
Yeah. And while they weren't quite what Lester and Earl were, they were good enough for me at that time. Yeah. And they did some good stuff. And I right then and there decided somehow I want to be, what I do for a lifetime is going to be involved in this kind of music.
Yeah. Well, Clyde, I think Reno and Smiley had the tightest band around, maybe with the exception of Flat Scruggs.
Ever after, and when I saw Lester and Earl, it blew me away even more. And I was up closer.
Yeah.
But at any rate, you asked about Alan Shelton. I listened to every possible country music broadcast in my little old 1954 Plymouth. Wasn't much of a radio, but it could pick up stations and around, and I'd always be listening for a bluegrass song, and you'd hear it on a DJ country program still back in the late 50s. You'd still hear bluegrass every once in a while. And I heard Alan's playing with Hack Johnson. He did something about a little red wagon, and the main one was Lost All My Money but a $2 bill.
Uh-huh.
And he really got that. And I said, and I'd already heard Ralph Stanley and some of the others, as well as Lester and Earl.
Right.
And I knew even back then that Lester and Earl were cut above the rest of them, without knowing why, exactly. But when I heard Alan Shelton, I said, that's the first banjo playing I've heard that could even be compared with Earl Scruggs.
Yeah.
And I say the same thing today.
Well,
no, I don't really. There's some great banjo players since then.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm really ignorant about the banjo, or ignorant, compared to like somebody like you. To me, they all sound just about the same, and there's no way I could tell. Well, I mean, like what differs in their playing? Why are they so similar? Or
you mean Alan and Earl?
Alan and
Earl, or banjo players in general?
Alan and Earl.
Well, they're not the same in the way they sound. Alan has what people will sometimes refer to as the Sheldon bounce. A very syncopated roll. He doesn't use it everywhere, and I've even heard Earl use it once or twice, but to some extent. But the similarity I see, the transcendental aspect of it is there that we talked about, that all great music has.
Yeah.
But above and beyond that, I think you're asking for something besides that, and there is something.
Well, that's a very interesting side of music altogether, I think.
Yeah, all great music has that, and they had it, and most things, including music, don't have it, but they did. But the main thing is, it's the right-hand attack, and the good taste that seems to go with it.
Right.
I mean, he has a clarity. Each note stands out individually, and he doesn't have a great sound. Alan didn't have a great sounding banjo. I played it at one time. I couldn't get a thing out of it.
Right.
But he sure could.
Yeah.
I missed the chance to play Earl's by being too backward to ask him. He played the one I had, the RB 75, said it was a nice banjo, but it clearly wasn't as good as his. And I just didn't ask him. I'm sure he would have let me play. He let different people play,
Yeah.
But I never got to do. That's another thing I wish I could have done. I'm well aware that most of that sound is more Earl than the banjo, but some of it has to be a little bit the banjo. Earl sounded, and Earl could make any banjo sound better than just about anybody else, but he still sounded best on that Granada. And I hated the Vega that he had. And I'll tell you another story about that later, if I haven't already. But at any rate, it's the clarity, the intensity, the drive. More than any one thing, it's simply the ability to get the right hand to get that clarity.
Yeah.
It's full, it's bassy, but it's sharp. And he even made, what he had was about a 1955 or 56, 57 raised head master tone for the pop metal raised head tone ring.
Yeah.
And they were very mediocre banjos. Better than anything you could buy then, no. But they weren't a great banjo. Didn't matter with Alan. He showed up for their, Jim and Jesse were doing a show at the City Auditorium in Asheville. And I think that was the night that Alan wasn't going to be able to make it. That might have been a different night at a different show. I'm not sure. But at any rate, he just made it sound great. Not quite as good as Earl in terms of tonality alone, or full bass response, but just as good in his own way. And Alan had his things going for him, which were unique too. His sounds. He originated a lot of the stuff that other people copied later. Not the Shelton bounce, but the backup. His backup was phenomenal too, as was Earl.
Yeah.
Earl's backup was great because of his taste. Alan's backup had the taste, but it also had a knowledge of chord structure beyond Earl's, I think, to some extent.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the thing that made him great. Many mediocre banjo players have loads of that. It was an attack. And there are banjo players today that can approach it too.
Yeah.
And also I've observed that it varies a lot from cut to cut. It tends to come out more in a recording studio, and even 2 songs recorded same night. Even with Earl.
Oh yeah.
Even Earl outdid himself occasionally.
Yeah.
Tunes like Your Love Is Like a Flower, I'll Go Steppin' Two, Dear Old Dixie, country blues artists are that's my second favorite kind of music too.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that was.
Blind Blake, and you turned me on to him.
Yeah.
And some of the others.
Well, and also classical guitar, I know you like.
Yeah, I do too. And string music, string quartets too. Not as much as bluegrass or country blues, but a whole lot. And classic guitar. Julian Bream for me is the man there.
Yeah, I know. And you told me a story about his shirts.
Oh yeah.
I told it to several people. Didn't you kind of operate according to the same principle? I mean, didn't you have a ton of light blue shirts, grayish flannel, not flannel, but corduroy pants?
Did I have? How's that question again?
Yes. Let me restate it. Did you get the inspiration from Julian Bream? Didn't he just buy new shirts every time his shirt supply ran out? He'd just go buy new shirts.
Yeah, and toss the dirty ones in a room.
Yeah.
I guess somebody came along and took them to the laundry eventually, but who knows?
Yeah.
But I don't know about the corduroy pants, but boy, I could sure listen to him play.
Yeah.
There's one particular number. It's rather long, and I absolutely love it. It's called the Grand Solo by Fernando Sor.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to hear that when you get a chance.
Yeah.
By Bream. Anyway, he had the drive too, and that actually the truth of the matter is, I think a great classic guitar in itself, independent of what you play on, independent of what kind of music is played, it has a more beautiful tone than a steel string.
Yeah.
Which you can't play bluegrass on it.
No, of course not. But I totally agree. You know, if you listen to the Segovia, for example, but you know, of course, everywhere you hear the influence of Segovia. Did you see Segovia live?
Oh yeah, like 6 feet away from it.
Yeah,
that's
one of these.
Bream too, yeah.
And Bream, yeah.
Segovia played. Well, I might have been 12 feet away from Segovia, but he played Symphony Hall, which was the big audience in Boston.
Uh-huh.
And Bream played Jordan Hall, which was the theater for the Berkeley music in Boston.
Okay.
And you could get closer, and it was a better sound for classic guitar.
Yeah.
And they had a little tiny, probably Neumann microphone hanging from the ceiling, and that's all. The rest of it was done by the player in the room. And it was a wonderful thing to see either of them. Segovia is credited justifiably, I think, with he was a man of tone. And he had these big, thick nails, and he really pulled the tone out. But any great classic guitarist got great tone. you didn't find a great classical musician that didn't have great technique.
Right.
And so that was a given. But anyway, but Bream had a little more drive, and I liked the modern approach to classical music more than the romantic approach that Segovia used, which seemed a little more flitty to me. I don't want to criticize him. He was great. He was the progenitor of the guitar, like Earl was the banjo.
Oh,
but,
sure.
But still, I like the straight ahead.
That's a matter of interpretation anyway, so.
Yeah, that's just interpretation. But at any rate, and I've got, I have a Mariah's Master Model classic, don't you? You saw that, didn't you?
I remember.
Yep.
I played it.
That's right, you did. Yep. And
oh yeah.
And it hadn't been played for a long time, and it still hasn't. But I'll see. I'm glad I've got it anyway.
Oh, it's
one of those things. Yep. So anyway, I heard Alan play those. I lost all my money with a $2 bill, and a Hack Johnson song about the Little Red Wagon, and a really wild instrumental. And later on, I heard him play one of my favorite records, two of them actually, Little Old Cabin in the Lane, where he does these great breaks on it, and also where he played some of the best backup I've ever heard on an old song called Down Among the Budded Roses. On the record, it just said Budded Roses. That was when he was with Jim and Eanes, not to be confused with the other recordings of that same song that Jim Eanes has done with other players that you're more likely to get on Facebook.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's even available on Facebook. It was on a Star Day record.
Yes, yes.
But it just struck me the same way Earl did. The band wasn't quite as good, but Alan's picking was phenomenal, and everything. Then he went with Jim and Jesse.
Yeah.
And I think they were the top. Well, this may be heretical, because the great lonesome music was played. Well, that was played earlier. The great lonesome music with Jimmy Martin and Carter Stanley came in the early 50s.
Yeah.
But between 60 and 65, I think Jim and Jess with Alan were the top bluegrass band.
Yeah. Sure.
And a lot of that was Alan, although Jim and Jess were certainly really good too.
Yeah.
But it was the attack. I mean, you just can't bring it off without that kind of attack. That's why there are so few great bluegrass banjo players. There's some that have come along and done some great stuff, and most of them have had certain periods or certain recording sessions that showed their full ability, but they weren't as consistent as Alan and Earl were. And I would have to say maybe just a hairbreadth less intense, you know what I mean? But I don't want to knock them.
No.
I mean, they were great. J.D. Crowe, Don Stover. In his earlier years, he all of a sudden burned out. But in his early years, up until the early 60s, he was right up there with the best of them.
Yeah. And to even compare it, it's just a matter of taste or interpretation. It's really, somebody is better physically or have better dexterity or anything. It's all.
They all had the right hand.
Yeah.
And who's the guy that lost the end of his finger that played with that girl from Texas? He was good too.
Well, the only one I can think of was Jerry Garcia. I don't know if he played in.
Who?
Garcia, but he didn't play in Texas.
He couldn't play for shit.
Well.
On a banjo.
Yeah. Well.
He lost a finger though. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know. If this was well, he wasn't from Texas.
No.
This other guy, but he was pretty darn good.
Who would that have been?
Hmm?
Was that Ed Shelton?
No, I never heard Ed Shelton.
Oh, Ed Shelton.
Uh,
You have not heard of Ed Shelton? Google the name. You'll find him. Alan Mundy is kind of closely associated with Ed Shelton.
uh-huh. Was that pretty good?
Yeah.
I never heard him. I'd love to hear him then.
Yeah, they had a band in Georgia. No, it was further. It was further west.
Well, I gotta hear him too then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Midway, Missouri, maybe.
Who?
I'm trying to think of the band. I know it well. I just can't remember the state. Mitch Land was in the band, and Byron Berlin played Phil. The Stone Mountain Boys, I guess.
I've heard that
No,
name.
Stony.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Stony Mountain Boys.
I've heard the name, but I never heard him play.
Yeah, there are some. They did some good. At least one good album that I've had for years. You know.
And Don Norman, who I got to know pretty well, did play great banjo. He can't do it anymore today. On that level, he's a real good guy, though.
Remind me of Don Norman again.
Don Norman, yeah, Don. Have you met Don then, or you just heard him?
It's a name that's so familiar, and I just can't place it.
Well, you need to meet him sometime. He's a real good guy. There were two identical red-headed twins, Don and Ron. They both played banjo. Don learned it first. Ron was a good banjo player. At one time, Don was one of the greats. But he can't he's a real good guy to talk to. He knows a lot about the music. Lives down in, I think, Alpharetta, or one of those towns down near Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
So, and I'm in touch with him occasionally on Facebook. But there's a contingent of bluegrass musicians in that group. And the Norman boys, they were in different bands. One was called the Bluegrass Five, I think. They never became that well known. And Walter Butler was in one of them. And once or twice, I rode down there and picked with them. I went down with Orville Freeman, the fiddler, one time.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I went. But, and Don and Ron came by the jam session one time I had at the store. And also there's another guy whose name I've been in touch with him too, and now I can't remember his name. I can't remember names, but I can still think abstractly. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
But I forget names. And anyway, he was he knew Alan, and they traded off some licks. Oh, I can give you a comment. I may have told you this already. But he one time asked Alan if he would like to have a nice old flathead master tone. And this would have been probably in the early 60s maybe, mm-hmm. or before. And Alan said, well, sure I would. It'd be damned if I'm going to pay $500 for a darn banjo. That was his response. And Gibson eventually gave him one of the more modern ones. And he, at one point, had an article in the paper, an interview, where he couldn't decide whether to use the one Gibson gave him or his old one. Mm-hmm. He said he'd probably go with the flathead. But what the heck? I mean, he didn't need a great banjo to sound great.
Right.
But anyway, that was his comment.
Yeah.
And he was I spoke to him a couple of times, but I never really got to know him. But he was purportedly a very nice guy too.
Yeah, I got to be around him a little bit it was like over a 2-day festival in Smithfield, North Carolina, several years ago. But yeah, he seemed to be really a good guy.
Yep, as was Don Reno, for that matter.
He's one of my old heroes I never got to meet. He was already passed when I came over. Don Reno.
Yep. I did play his banjo. It was an RBC 75. You know what it was, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's how I got tuned in. And I'll have to say, even to this day, when I'm listening to bluegrass music, the ones that light me up the most are still Earl or Alan.
Yeah.
Earl in before his later days when he kind of burned out a little too, you know, but more than a little,
Right.
but that's another story. But that's not as much as he put into it. That's quite understandable.
Right.
Oh, I was going to tell you another thing about Earl. Well, two things which seem to contradict each other. I probably told you the first story already. There was a guy named Junior Sutton that picked a little bit of bluegrass banjo,
Mm-hmm.
and he and I happened to be taking in a show in Canton, North Carolina.
Was he? Let me interrupt you here, Clyde. Was he any kin to the Suttons?
To the show?
Like Terry and Grover and Brian,
No.
of course.
And Brian?
Yeah.
No, he wasn't.
Okay.
Totally different family. He didn't have the perspective or the ability that they have.
Right.
But he just played a little bit of banjo, you know. But he liked to look at Earl play, and I did too. I think Ralph Lewis and a bunch and Ronnie Smith warmed up for him that night, actually. It was just a little movie theater, and they were doing one of those in-between gigs, you know. They just come back over from California, having recorded the stuff for the Beverly Hillbilly. And I spoke to Lester, and he seemed to take a rather negative view of all the stuff he had to go through to do that, like it wore him out more than anything.
Right.
But Earl tried to fix a lot of the girl I was married to at the time, her high heel came off, and Earl saw it backstage and tried to fix it for her, but it didn't stay on.
What a gentleman. What a gentleman.
Yep. Anyway, I walked up to Earl with Junior Sutton, and he asked Earl, who's standing there, I think holding his banjo, don't remember for sure, and said, "Is my banjo gonna sound as good as yours?" And Earl answered in one word, "Nope." And he said, "Well, I guess he was was under contract to play that Vega, which he hated the sound of, you know."
Yeah.
I don't blame him, but he'd earned the right to do it. But with what else he'd done in his life, but at any rate, then Junior asked him, "Well, is that Vega gonna sound as good as my banjo?" And Earl says, "No." He told the truth.
Yeah, that's just with the same authority. I've heard both Tony Rice and Bobby Hicks talk about their instruments.
Okay.
You know, the same kind of definitive, which I'm not going to contest that at all.
Right. Absolutely. However, there is a side that most people aren't in touch with, and I don't hold this against Earl. And like I say, he suffered for over a decade just to be able to keep playing, being constantly in pain. You know the whole story after the accident.
Right. Yeah.
And all the I mean, I don't blame him a bit, and it's not up to me to blame him or not blame him. But I don't have. I think that's just fine. You know, the life he led as a generality. But at any rate, I got to know Bill Keith pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel a little guilty. Not that it mattered, not that it affected Bill in any way, but I always used to think that he wasn't one of the very top banjo players. That he was more intellectualized and might not have had that right-hand drive. Well, I've heard him when he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also heard one done in recent years where he was really good. And then I listened just an hour or so before you called to some of the records I got to my new phone, some of the songs I listened to through my new phone.
Uh-huh.
And one of them was Shenandoah Breakdown. and I'm pretty sure that was Bill. Sound.
Yeah,
Sounded like
that's one of the cuts they did there with with Berlin, no Baker and
Yep.
who's seen that?
Well, I think the break he did on that was magnificent.
Yeah, the Baker. Yeah.
It was a wonderful break. So all these years, I've been under a false impression that Bill wasn't as good as he really was, but he was capable of playing extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
He did at times go in a more intellectual direction than would have been my favorite in bluegrass music, rather than to what I thought would be more the heart of it. But nonetheless, he was a great banjo player.
Yeah.
And I have to say it now. So anyway, Alan and Earl still lit my candle more than anybody else ever has on the banjo, and it had more to do with that requirement that the best bluegrass banjo seems to have. You have to have that attack, or it doesn't work in the same way. And not very many people have it, and most that do aren't consistent with it.
Right.
And I don't know anybody. Oh, I'll tell you, I can mention some other great banjo players that aren't well known. Buddy Rose, who lived down the street from me, when I was going to school at Tusculum, played some beautiful banjo, and was very much into the difference between Earl and everybody else, and understood it extremely well. And you can hear a recording of him, I think, doing Farewell Blues on Facebook. Not quite up to Earl.
When you say Facebook, do you mean YouTube or is it on Facebook?
What do I think of Facebook?
No, I said, do you mean YouTube or Facebook?
Yeah, this was YouTube.
Okay.
Unfortunately, most of the stuff on it, people took on with their little camera, and you can't hear what the hell's going on.
Right.
Especially Alan's stuff. I think there's only one or two cuts on there that really show what he can do. You can get them, but you don't hear them on YouTube. But on the other hand, people can have access to what they otherwise wouldn't have. And you can dig out the really good recorded stuff if you know where to look, but most people don't. You're not going to go to your friendly neighborhood record store and find them there.
No, not exactly. No.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
But and Bobby Thompson was very good too, in his own way.
Yeah.
He used to sit around outside the Langrene Hotel, Lottie told me, and practice in the little parking booth there. Well, a year before I got down there. I feel like I got down to Asheville, 58, a year too late, to catch the full-fledged bluegrass native audience. They'd already started moving in to rock and roll, except for the committed bluegrass musicians like Ralph and Charlene's dad.
So the oldest, if you go back in history, I think we both like to go back in history in that direction. The oldest people with bluegrass or old time music roots.
Well, on the recording scene, you're probably already well aware of that. There was Lester and Earl, Jimmy Martin, Osborne Brothers were just starting out with Red Allen.
Yeah, and I was thinking just locally around Asheville there.
Oh, around Asheville.
Yeah.
Okay. I had a hard time finding any. You always do have trouble making your first contact. My first contact really was Ralph and Orville Freeman and George Rice, or Charlene's dad.
Well,
and they usually had somebody else. And they had some power. I mean, I've mentioned how Ralph Lewis played at that time. You couldn't tell it completely in the recordings he did with Bill Monroe. Well, Bill had so much power, it would kind of take away emphasis from anybody else at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've had the privilege of playing with Ralph a few times, so I know.
Oh, great.
What a fine player he was.
Was he playing a guitar then?
Both. I played with him. Played on stage actually. I think one of my first gigs in the U.S. was with Ralph Lewis. In
Yeah.
1986, I believe. So.
Okay. Well, Ralph probably was still playing the guitar then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he's a great mandolin player, the Monroe style of mandolin playing.
But when we used to play, we used to get together and jam twice a week. I'd drive all the way up from Greenville, Tennessee to play with. I had other people in Greenville and a couple of other contingents around here, which I'll mention. But they were the best. And of course, Orville was always great.
Oh, yeah.
And Ralph was always a great bluegrass rhythm guitar. Not fancy. Fancier than Jim McReynolds, but not really what you call one. He didn't play a lot of extra stuff, but he played it power.
He played whatever was needed, and that's a sign of a consummate musician to me.
Yep.
Don't overplay, or underplay. Just try to play with stylistic integrity or whatever,
Which is exactly what he did. Yeah. And when George was the best singer, and George was a wonderful guy, and everybody thought the world of him, but he wasn't any kind of an instrumentalist, didn't try to be. And he could play the right chords on time.
Yeah.
He didn't drag anything, but they would both play guitars at that time.
Right.
And when Ralph quit playing, the whole band sagged. Not because George was playing badly, but it just didn't have that super punch that Ralph was putting into it.
Yeah.
And you could tell that. And you could always tell it when he played guitar.
Yeah.
And I can see why Monroe hired him. Even though you couldn't really hear that completely on the recordings he made with you wouldn't pick him as one of Monroe's super outstanding rhythm guitars.
I think Ralph Lewis is one of Monroe's best lead singers ever. I mean it.
Yeah, I think he was too. I think he was really one of the great bluegrass rhythm guitar players.
Yeah.
Along with, we both know who the others were.
Dale.
Tony, go ahead. Tony Rice.
And I tell you who
Charlie Waller.
Yeah, and Jimmy Martin.
And Jimmy Martin, right.
I found a radio show or some live broadcast I had here, and I digitized it and put it up on YouTube. You ought to check it out. It's Jimmy Martin and Tony Rice live together.
Wow.
At where was it? Some festival. I think it was the Festival of the Bluegrass in Louisville or Lexington.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff. I gotta write this down.
Yeah, I'll send you some links.
Okay. That'd be good. Now, Chris, did I mention Chris Sharp was here during the hurricane? He said he'd been in touch with you some.
Yeah.
Have you got a chance to talk to Chris a little bit?
We get together it seems like a couple of times a year, and we have a big time. I love him and his family.
Right.
Yeah. Good people.
Well, during that last hurricane that was heading this way, he got his family out of. I guess he lives in Raleigh now.
Yeah, he's over. Yeah, Durham. Yep, exactly.
Durham, and he came to Asheville, and we saw it on Facebook, and gave him a call because this isn't that far. No, actually, it may have been closer to here than Asheville. I think it was actually closer to Johnson City. Okay. And at any rate, he came over, and he showed me some of the recordings he'd made with some of the people there, and we talked a lot about some of the same things we're talking about. Mm-hmm. I don't think he had the extremely broad view, but not far from it.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I enjoy.
Broader than,
Yeah, I enjoy talking to him. And I enjoy being around his family. They speak Japanese, and I just love to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you hear any of the recordings he'd made with George Buckner and himself playing his Lester Flat style guitar?
Oh yeah.
You did hear them?
Yeah.
You did, yeah.
Yeah.
I was pretty impressed. I heard him play just one guitar break in that style, and I was amazed you could do it with a finger and a thumb.
Oh yeah. Well, he's the master of it.
And
so when we get together and play, he plays all the instruments, but typically he'll play the guitar, and then we'll have some Scruggs banjo player like Arnie Rogers, and it's a lot of fun, or Hugh Moore, and it's a lot of fun to play those Flat and Scruggs songs. It's some of the most fun repertoire to play.
You probably, if you've talked to him a good bit, he's probably told you the same thing. But in case he hasn't, just tell me if you already know it. But he has the belief, and he's probably right, almost definitely right, that Lester and Earl kept the same band, and in doing that, they didn't have much change in personnel, mostly just fiddlers.
Right.
And so they didn't have any guitar players break away from their band very much at all. Well, Mike Wiseman, but he had his own style anyway, and Jim Eanes. But whereas Bill was turning out musicians right and left, so including Jimmy Martin, who was a major influence.
Oh yeah.
And
major.
Chris thinks that that's the main reason why most bluegrass rhythm guitar players today are flat pickers, and nobody really, or very few, if anyone, has the Flat and Scruggs sound, because they don't do it like Lester did it.
Right.
Did he talk to you about that too?
Not as much as, but I hope we were going to actually get together here before Christmas. It never happened, but
yeah, definitely. Yeah, but I thought that was, it never occurred to me, but I think there's some validity in that. At any rate,
he's definitely a thinking person, so.
For sure.
Yeah, really. He's learned Japanese, and.
Yep. And I, either way, it re-emphasizes the fact that Flat and Scruggs were unique in almost every kind of way, and they always will be, I think.
Absolutely.
Let me get. I hope I'm not monopolizing the conversation.
No. I just love hearing these stories, Or they more than stories. They're profound statements from a deep source.
I've had this on my mind a lot, and really nobody to pass it to talk to about it, really.
Right.
So, and I thought, and anyway, here I go. Here I am at it.
Yeah.